but the ending thing, that is this thing, is never printed. Okay, this is because if the assertion fails on a particular line, if assertion fails on a particular line, then the code or the execution simply stops on that line. Okay, now there can be situations in which you would want to stop on the test if the assertion is failing, because if it is a critical failure, for example a button is not present on the page, right, you cannot move forward with the test case. Okay, it's a critical failure, right? But if it is a soft error, for example some text is not matching or the titles of the page do not match, you don't want assertion to just stop the execution on that particular line, and you just don't want that the test case should be terminated, right? In that case, we have a solution, right? We can use a try-catch block, but that's not enough. More like I'll tell you. I'll in the source folder I'll create a new package called as exception handling in Java. I'm coming over to Java language in right just a minute. I'll create a new class, say called as learning exception handling. Right. Now suppose in this class we have the main function public static okay, and in this main I'll generate a similar scenario. I'll write over here system.out.println a, then I'll write int I equals to 3 divided by 2 and system.out.println b. Right. If I run this, I get a and b printed in the reports, right? But suppose I write 3 divided by 0 here. Okay, I write 3 divided by 0. When I run this, it gives me an exception. I get an exception known as arithmetic exception divided by 0. And in the in the results, only A is printed. So this is exactly the situation happening with us. Now we can overcome this situation by by keeping this line inside a try-catch block. So as I was saying, I can keep this inside a try block and a catch block. Now in case an exception is an undesired condition into which the program runs and terminates without fully executing. Okay. To overcome that, we write try-catch block, and inside it we write system.out.println error. Inside the catch block I have written error. Now in case the error comes on this line, the control will automatically come over to the catch block and it will print whatever, or it will do whatever is there in the catch block and move forward. If you run this now, you will get the output A error and B. So we have actually caught the error out here, but still we are able to move forward, right? When an error is generated, okay, there is an internal class called exception. The object of that class is created in the memory, and E is the reference to that object. We get this E out here. So if you write over here system.out.println E dot get message, so this will give you the message as well what kind of error it is. It will print divided by 0 error. Or if you want to get the complete thing, you write E dot print stack trace, right? If you run this, you will get this kind of error message that it's a divided by 0 arithmetic exception, right? So if you comment these things, you will get a simple thing that you are getting an error, but you are able to recover from that error. Okay. Now out here, if there is no error, then the catch block is not called. Okay, catch block is only called in case there is an error. Right. So similar kind of thing I can also do out here with this line. I can include it in a try catch block, in try catch block. Okay, but in TestNg, instead of writing exception, we write throwable. This is an internal class called throwable. We in TestNg we write throwable, and inside it I'll write system.out.println values do not match. Okay. Now I expect that completed the test should also be printed this time. So when you run this test this time, it runs fine and it prints starting the test, values do not match, and completed the test. Right, this is what I wanted. But if you look at the results are coming over as passed. Why? Because actually I have overcome the assertion error. I have caught it. I never presented it to the reports. I simply caught the error and continued forward. Right? So how do I overcome this? Now one problem is solved and another problem has come, that is this thing over here is passing. Now I never want that. So to handle this kind of situation, we will use a lot of things, like we'll use listeners in TestNg, right? I'm sorry. Right. So I'll talk about this. I'll not talk about this right now because we will get confused with this. Okay, listeners, what practically I'll do is, in very layman terms, what I'll do is I'll create a kind of basket. Okay, whenever the error comes, I'll catch the error with try catch, and out here on this particular line, I'll put the error in a basket. So all the errors which come up in the test case, I keep on putting them in a basket, and in the end when the test case is over, I will pick the errors from this basket and I'll report the errors. Okay, so that's what I'll do. Fine, so this is done with the help of listeners in TestNg. Okay, so this topic is remaining. I'll come back to this. Right, now let's come back to login and change password test, which I had created. Now I told you that by writing depends on methods over here, I can make this method dependent on other tests. Right, so out here you have this change password test dependent on the login test. Fine, and when you run this, it gets executed. Fine. Right, now suppose in do login test I have some assertion. I write over here assert dot, I simply fail it. Assert dot fail. I am simply failing the login test. In case the login test fails, then change password will not execute automatically, because depends on means that only when the login test it passes, go and execute the change password. Now if I run this, login and change password, if I run it as a TestNg test, you will see that do login test is failing, but change password is yellow. Yellow color signifies that the test case has been skipped. Okay, yellow color signifies that the test case has been skipped. If we have to skip the test case deliberately, okay, for example, I have another test in this function called as public void do logout. Right. Now, if sometimes you have a situation in which you don't want to execute a particular test case. Suppose there are 500 tests and you do not want to execute some test cases, right? So you can deliberately skip those test cases by writing this line: throw new skip exception, skipping the test case. Okay. Now generally what we do is that we in the Excel files like this, I'll just tell you. This is just a small example. Yeah, in the Excel file, you keep all the test cases like this. You have the test cases, you have the run mode associated with them, right? If the run mode is no for the test case, you do not execute the test. If the run mode is yes, you execute the test, right? So in the Excel file, we keep the information which test case to run and which test case not to run. And later on, when I teach you how to read from Excel file and all, right, if the run mode is equal to no, I'll throw the skip exception inside the test case. Okay, and when you run this, you will see that in results of running the test, the logout test is skipping, and the message I get is skipping the test case. This message is the same message which I have written over here. This comes in the reports. Okay, so this is how you can skip the test case, right? I'll comment out this line. Now, this logout test is actually dependent on change password test or the login test. If both the tests they execute successfully, only then the logout test should be executed. So again, I can use the same command over here, that is depends on methods equals to do login and change password, right? So my logout test now depends on both the test cases. You can give a comma and separate the test cases in the curly brackets. It's like an array out here. So when you run this, the login test will be failing, and because login test fails, both change password and logout, they are not executed. Okay, so there are many things, there are many other things associated with TestNg as well, right? Now suppose right, I'll just make a new class known as Parameterizing Tests, right? Now suppose you have a test method called as public void transfer money. Suppose you are automating some banking application, there is a function called transfer money, right? And this is a test case, right? Now this test case has to be executed more than once with different sets of data, right? So what all parameters you have for transfer money? Suppose you have the account number, you have bank name, right? You have the amount which has to be transferred, right? Suppose only these three parameters are there. Okay, time being, just assume. I cannot get your question, Satish. We can use overloading, right? I cannot get, like, oh, you are saying that in this you can write them? That's what I'm going to do, but to parameterize the test cases, I need the test data as well, right? So in TestNg, we have an annotation known as data provider, okay? And you write over here public object array 2-dimensional get data. Okay, this data provider annotation, right? You have to import it, and it returns your 2-dimensional object array, right? What is a 2-dimensional array? A 2-dimensional array in Java, it is something like this. It's like a grid having rows and columns. Okay. Now, what is object array? I'll talk about it in some time, but first listen to this. What a 2-dimensional object array looks like. Right? It looks like this. It's got rows and columns. In TestNg, we keep the test data in a 2-dimensional object array. The array, if it is having 4 rows, number of rows, actually, the number of rows, they signify the number of times you want to execute your test. If you are having 4 rows, then your test has to be executed 4 times. And number of columns are equal to number of test parameters you have. Right? For example, username, password, email ID, phone number, or something like that. Okay. So basically, what I want to tell you is, in the first row, the data for the first test would be line. In the second row, data for the second test would be line. In the third row, third iteration of the test, and fourth row, fourth iteration. Okay, and all of these rows and columns have row and column numbers. Okay, for example, like this: 0, 0. This is 1, 1. This is 2, 0. Right? So they have got cell numbers. They can be identified with row number and the column number. Okay? Right? Now, what is object array? I'll come over to this example over here, and I'll tell you something that, for example, I have a normal array. I make a string array in Java. What I am trying to tell people is that this is an array, single dimensional array, right, which would look something like this, having 3 sections in it. Okay. Now every section, the first section, single dimensional array, can hold a string. The first section will hold a string. The second section will hold a string. The third section will also hold a string. But if I put a number, say integer, it will give me an error. That this is the array of string type. You cannot store a number and integer inside it. Similarly, if we have an integer array, I can store integer in it, but I cannot store string in it. But in Java, they say that you make the array of class known as object array. Okay, and you can store any data type in it. You can write O0 equals to 1, 11, right? Then O1 equals to a string, right? You can do anything. You can put any data type in it, say O2 equals to boolean, true or false. Okay, you can do anything with this, right? And just on it. 1 minute, right? So you can keep any type of data in an object array, right? So this is what we use in TestNg, because sometimes in our test data we can have a number, sometimes we can have a string or something like that. So we use object array. And suppose I make an object array having 2 rows and 3 columns. That means I need to, this is the number of rows and this is the number of columns in 2-dimensional object array. I need to execute this test 2 times, and I have got 3 different types of data sets with me. I have got account number, bank name and amount. So I'll keep it like this. I'll write the first row 0, 0, the account number, right? Then ARR 0, 1 is the bank name, and ARR 0, 2 is the amount, right? And this is the first row. Similarly, I can define the second row having some other bank name and all, or whatever it is, right? And in the end I'll write return, fine. And in my test function I'll write over here, the first thing which is coming is integer, right? So I'll write int account number, comma, second is a string which is bank name, so I'll write string bank name, and third is your amount, so I'll write int amount, right? So number of columns should be equal to number of parameters in your test. That is, if you are giving 3 columns over here, 3 parameters should be there in the test, and that's it. Okay, one more thing, in the test you have to write that the data provider for this test is this function. So now TestNg automatically it will recognize when you run this test. Okay, TestNg will go here, it will read this is a test case, fine, data is coming from this function. TestNg will go inside this function, it will see that fine, object array is there, it is having 2 sets of data. So automatically TestNg will call this function 2 times, first with this set of data, second with this set of data. If I right click on this test and I run it as a TestNg test, in the results you will see that okay, hold on, this is 1, 1, 1, right? This is the 0th row, this is the second row, right? You will see that this test is running 2 times, right? So this is how you parameterize the test cases, fine. This is how you parameterize the test cases, okay? And that's it, right? That's all for parameterizing, and I think the